Carl Jung explained, "Why those who suffered the most act this way? In the beginning, there is a twilight, not the golden light of day, nor the total blackness of night, but that elusive, trembling moment where the conscious mind wavers, hesitant, on the edge of the abyss. It is here, in this liminal space, that the shadow stirs, the shadow that lives in the folds of our being, unseen and often unspoken. It is not a mere absence of light, but a presence of the deepest, most sacred darkness. Within us, the shadow is the silent echo of our wounds, the parts of ourselves we have exiled, banished into the unconscious by the harsh judgment of the ego's gaze. To meet the shadow is to stand at the threshold of an inner wilderness, wild and untamed, mysterious and dangerous, yet pulsating with raw vitality. It is the primal wound of the soul, the secret chamber where pain, fear, and denial have been locked away to protect the fragile persona from collapse. The persona, the face we show to the world, is but a mask fashioned carefully over years of survival. It seeks acceptance and love, yet it is not the totality of who we are. In the shadow lies what we fear most, the parts of ourselves that contradict the ego's neat story. It holds our rage, shame, lust, greed, envy, the desires and impulses we dare not reveal. But it also contains the forgotten gifts, the lost treasures of authenticity and creativity that can only emerge once the shadow is faced with courage. To neglect the shadow is to live in half-light, forever haunted by the ghosts of what we refuse to know. It whispers to us in dreams, in fleeting emotions, in the subtle pulls of behavior that seem beyond our control. Consider the myth of Narcissus, who fell in love with his own reflection but refused to look deeper. His tragedy was not vanity alone, but the refusal to acknowledge the depths beneath the surface, the shadow of his own being. To embark on the journey of individuation is to go beyond the shallow pool of conscious identity and dive into the dark waters of the unconscious, where the shadow waits like a guardian of hidden truths. This shadow is not evil in the simplistic sense. It is the natural counterpart to the light of consciousness. Like night to day, it balances and completes us. But this balance requires an act of descent, a symbolic death of the ego's illusions, a surrender into the unknown. It is a sacred confrontation, a wrestling match with the self's darker aspects. Only through this struggle can transformation begin. The ego resists this encounter because it threatens its fragile sense of control and coherence. To meet the shadow is to acknowledge our fragmentation, the parts of ourselves we have abandoned. In the name of fitting in or surviving pain, it is a confrontation with the silence of the soul's unhealed scars, the silence where cries were never heard, where tears were swallowed in secret. Yet, within this shadowed silence lies the possibility of rebirth. Like the alchemical Negredo, the blackening stage where matter dissolves and chaos reigns, the encounter with the shadow heralds a profound inner collapse, a necessary dissolution before renewal. This is the death that the soul must face, a psychic crucible where the old self dies so the true self may emerge. Our behaviors, the ways in which we act out pain, fear, and desire, are shaped by this shadow. Those who have suffered deeply often carry shadows that dictate patterns of defense and reaction. Sometimes these shadows manifest as anger or withdrawal, sometimes as addiction or compulsive behaviors. Yet beneath these manifestations is a wounded soul, striving for wholeness, crying out in the language of unconscious symbolism. To understand why those who have suffered act in particular ways, we must listen to the shadow's whisper. It tells stories of abandonment, betrayal, loss, and yearning. It reveals the psychic wounds that formed the architecture of the self, often before words could give them shape. The shadow is the dark narrative behind our conscious story, the part that moves us unconsciously, shaping our choices and relationships. In the depth psychology of Jung, the shadow is not merely a psychological problem to be fixed, but a sacred mystery to be embraced. It is a doorway to greater self-awareness, a portal to the soul's hidden depths. To walk this path is to accept the paradox of light and dark within, to hold the pain without fleeing, and to listen to the silent language of the unconscious. This journey begins with acknowledgement, an honest, compassionate facing of what has been denied. It requires humility, for the ego must loosen its grip and allow the shadow to speak. In that sacred dialogue, healing begins. The shadow becomes a teacher, revealing the psychic patterns that bind us and the gifts that lie beneath. Like the hermit who retreats into the cave to seek inner wisdom, we must enter the darkness of the soul. In that silence, away from the distractions of the outer world, we confront the shadow's whisper. It is a fragile moment, terrifying and illuminating. We may feel the weight of loneliness, the sting of old wounds, and the cold breath of fear. But we also find the ember of inner fire, a spark that, when nurtured, can kindle transformation. The shadow's whisper is a call to wholeness. It invites us to integrate what has been split off, to reconcile the fractured parts of the psyche. This integration is not a quick fix, but a lifelong pilgrimage, a sacred dance of light and shadow, death and rebirth. It is the essence of individuation, the process by which the self unfolds in its fullness. To ignore this call is to live in exile from oneself, forever haunted by unacknowledged pain. To answer it is to begin a sacred conversation, a dialogue, with the deepest parts of the soul. It is a journey into the underworld of the psyche, where the treasure of authentic being awaits beyond the veil of fear. In the silence of that meeting, we discover that the shadow is not our enemy, but a hidden ally. It carries the keys to our liberation, the code to our healing. The wounds we bear, though painful, are also the gateways to our greatest strength. Like the phoenix rising from ash, the soul finds renewal through embracing the shadow's whisper. This is why those who have suffered the most often act in ways that confound understanding. Their behaviors are the echoes of shadowed pain, the language of a wounded soul seeking reconciliation. To see them only through the lens of their actions is to miss the deeper story, the sacred narrative written in the shadow's tongue. The path forward is not denial or repression, but courageous acknowledgement. It is an invitation to look beyond the surface, to listen deeply, and to honor the silent voice that has long been ignored. In doing so, we begin to heal not only ourselves, but the collective wound reflected in every shadow we meet. So let us step gently into the twilight of our being. Let us lean into the shadow's whisper with open hearts and steady eyes. Here, in this sacred silence, transformation stirs, the birth of a self that is whole, luminous, and free. Beneath the carefully constructed walls of the persona, beneath the masks we wear to navigate the world, lies a more fragile, more sacred presence, the eternal child. This child is not merely a memory of youth, but a living part of the self, a tender spark of innocence, vulnerability, and potential that remains untouched by the cynicism that life often demands. Yet within this sacred child also dwells the imprint of early wounds, those psychic fractures where the rawness of trauma and the purity of innocence intertwine, shaping the architecture of the soul in ways both visible and invisible. The persona is the fortress, the ego's armor against the world's storms. It speaks in roles and scripts learned for survival, sculpted by the judgments and expectations of others. But the child within is the wellspring beneath that armor, the primal source of feeling and being, untouched by the facade of performance. It is the soul's original flame, flickering through the shadows of memory and emotion. And yet, this flame bears the scars of suffering. The wounded child within is the silent witness to those moments when the world's harshness first pierced the veil of safety. The abandonment, the rejection, the pain of not being seen or loved for who we truly were. These early wounds, often unspoken and unrecognized, become the hidden fissures through which our later patterns of pain and defense leak out. They shape the unconscious scripts that govern how we relate to ourselves and others. Like a fragile crystal, the child's psyche shatters under the weight of trauma, yet the shards remain embedded deep in the soul's core, refracting light and shadow alike. The child's pain becomes a shadowy guide, leading us to the unconscious patterns we reenact in adulthood, often without awareness. It is here that the dance between the wounded child and the protective persona begins, a delicate balancing act of concealment and expression. This interplay between innocence and trauma is the soil from which many of our unconscious behaviors grow. When the child within feels unsafe, it calls forth defenses, walls of anger, withdrawal, or numbing that serve to protect but also imprison. The ego, seeking stability, learns to ignore or suppress the child's cries, turning away from the rawness of early pain, yet the child's voice, though muffled, never fully disappears. It emerges in dreams, in moments of emotional overwhelm, in the subtle ways we sabotage connection and joy. To journey toward healing is to listen with compassionate reverence to this inner child. It is to enter the sacred space where the child's wounds can be seen, felt, and held without judgment. Here, the soul opens to the paradox of fragility and resilience, the knowledge that the very suffering which wounded the child also holds the seed of transformation. In Jungian terms, the wounded child is an archetype that embodies both the potential for renewal and the weight of psychic pain. It is a symbol of the ego's early fragility and the self's enduring capacity for rebirth. The child is the chrysalis, stage of the psyche where the raw material of experience is held before it is transmuted into a higher form of consciousness. This stage is often marked by enantiodromia, the turning of opposites, where innocence is shadowed by trauma. Light is inseparable from darkness. The wounded child lives in this liminal space, neither fully broken nor fully healed, embodying the tension that propels the soul's individuation journey. The imprint of early wounds is not destiny, but a map. It reveals the psychic terrain that the soul must traverse to reclaim wholeness. These wounds invite us into the deeper mystery of the self, urging a descent into the unconscious, where the child's pain can be held, integrated, and transformed. This process is not linear nor simple. It demands patience and presence, a willingness to face the ache of abandonment, the sting of betrayal, and the silent void of loneliness. It asks that we recognize the child's suffering as sacred, not shameful, and that we become the loving witness that the child so desperately needs. In this witnessing, the child's wounds begin to soften. The cold fortress of the persona cracks, and light filters through the fractures. The child's laughter, long silenced, stirs beneath the rubble of pain. Healing begins as the soul reconnects with its original source, the wellspring of vitality and creative potential that exists beyond suffering. This inner reconciliation echoes the alchemical process of transformation, where nigredo, the blackness of dissolution, is followed by albedo, the whitening and purification of the soul. The wounded child is both the darkness and the light, the shadow and the hope, intertwined in the sacred mystery of becoming. Those who suffer often carry the wounded child hidden deep within, shaping their patterns of pain and defense in ways that ripple through their lives. Their outer behaviors are echoes of this inner reality, defensive walls, repeated wounds, and the relentless search for safety and love. Yet within this pain lies the spark of awakening, the call to return to the self in its most vulnerable and authentic form. To embrace the wounded child is to open the heart to the sacredness of suffering and the possibility of rebirth. It is to journey beyond the illusions of perfection and control into the messy, beautiful terrain of true selfhood. Here the soul learns that healing is not about erasing pain, but about weaving it into the tapestry of wholeness. The eternal child within invites us to trust in the resilience of the human spirit, to honor the depth of our wounds, and to courageously face the shadow of early suffering. It calls us to become guardians of our own inner sanctuaries, nurturing the fragile flame of innocence that still burns beneath the layers of persona and pain. This journey is the heart of individuation, the unfolding of the self through the integration of all its parts, shadow and light alike. It is the sacred pilgrimage from fragmentation to unity, from exile to homecoming. As we listen to the wounded child's silent song, we begin to understand the profound truth of our being. That in the depths of suffering lies the seed of transformation, and in the tender heart of pain lies the gateway to the soul's true freedom. Out of the silent forge of necessity, the soul begins to craft a mask, a persona shaped by fire and shadow. This mask is neither villain nor hero, but a shapeshifter woven from the threads of survival and longing. It is the form the ego takes to navigate the outer world, a delicate veil that both conceals and reveals, protects and confines. It is born not from choice, but from the primal need to belong, to be seen, to endure in a world often harsh and unyielding. The persona emerges at the boundary between the inner world and the outer realm, a liminal creation designed to mediate the self's encounter with society. Like a chameleon in the shifting light of day, it adapts, changes, and performs, wearing the roles demanded by circumstance. It is the first mask the psyche presents, the costume in the drama of life, but also a fortress built to shield the fragile, a core beneath. Yet this mask, though necessary, is also a prison. It is forged in the fires of suffering, shaped by wounds that whisper in the shadows of consciousness. The pain that the wounded child carries is translated into the language of the persona, roles of strength to hide weakness, smiles that mask despair, laughter that covers loneliness. It is a script written in the unconscious, enacted repeatedly until the lines blur and the mask feels like the only truth. In this dance of masks, we see the tension between appearance and essence, between the ego's crafted self and the deeper self that lies hidden. The persona serves the ego's need for stability and acceptance, but at the cost of fragmenting the soul. It demands performance, conformity, and silence, asking the individual to deny the shadow, to keep the wounded child locked away, and to present a polished, acceptable image to the world. Here lies the paradox of the mask of survival. It is both protector and betrayer. It shields the soul from further harm, yet separates us from our own authenticity. It is a mask forged in fire, but also a mask that dims the light of the self. It is a necessary fiction, a sacred lie that keeps us safe, yet also a barrier to wholeness. The mask's creation is a testament to the soul's resilience and adaptability. It reflects the archetype of the trickster, fluid, clever, and sometimes deceptive, who navigates the boundaries of order and chaos. The persona embodies the complexity of human survival, the tension between concealment and revelation that defines much of our existence. Yet, beneath the mask lies the deeper yearning of the self, the call to authenticity, the longing to shed the layers of artifice and reconnect with the soul's original flame. This call stirs beneath the surface, a quiet rebellion against the roles imposed by suffering and necessity. It is the beginning of the individuation journey, the invitation to look beyond the persona and encounter the self in all its complexity. 2. Meet the mask is to recognize the soul's great paradox, that the very tool of survival can become the barrier to freedom. It requires courage to peel back the layers of performance, to face the shadow cast by the mask, and to reclaim the parts of the self hidden behind its guise. This process echoes the alchemical stages where the soul must pass through dissolution before rebirth. The mask, like the chrysalis, must be shed, not destroyed, but transcended, so that the true self may emerge. It is an invitation to enantiodromia, the turning of opposites, where the strength of the mask meets the vulnerability of the child, and together they dance toward wholeness. As we explore the mask of survival, we begin to see how suffering has sculpted the roles we endlessly play. Each mask tells a story, a history of pain and adaptation, a coded message from the unconscious. To understand these stories is to reclaim agency over our own narrative, to transform the mask from a prison into a bridge, connecting ego and self, shadow and light. In this sacred conversation with the mask, the soul learns the art of balance, between concealment and openness, between defense and vulnerability. It is a journey of integration, where the persona becomes not a cage, but a costume worn consciously, a form that honors both the world's demands and the self's truth. The mask of survival is not a falsehood to be rejected, but a sacred symbol of human endurance. It is the armor forged in the crucible of suffering, yet it need not obscure the radiance of the self. When the soul embraces this paradox, the mask transforms, from a barrier to a threshold, from a veil to a window through which the light of authenticity may shine. In this alchemical space between fire and shadow, between concealment and revelation, the soul begins to unravel the stories bound in the mask's folds. It is here that the journey deepens, where the ego's need to belong meets the self's call to freedom, and where the dance of survival becomes the dance of transformation. Thus, the mask of survival becomes a sacred emblem of the soul's journey, a reminder that within the roles we play, the parts we hide, and the faces we wear, lies the profound potential for rebirth and wholeness. There's a moment in every soul's journey when the outer noise fades and the self finds itself standing at the edge of a vast, silent cavern, the abyss of alienation. Here, beneath the surface of everyday life, the soul feels the sharp sting of solitude, a profound exile, not of place but of being. It is a psychic desolation where the threads that bind self to other unravel, leaving a hollow space echoing with the silence of separation. This abyss is no mere loneliness, but a deeper fracture, a rift where the soul's longing for connection meets the cruel shadow of abandonment. The self, once woven seamlessly into the fabric of relationship, now finds itself unmoored, adrift in a dark expanse where the familiar shapes dissolve into fog. This is the realm of psychic exile, a place where the ego's defenses falter and the soul is stripped bare, forced to confront the raw emptiness that suffering has carved within. In this silent cavern, the fear of being forgotten, unseen, unloved, becomes a spectral presence, haunting the corridors of consciousness. It is the shadow of abandonment, the wound that whispers, "You are alone." This shadow is an ancient archetype, an echo of primal separation, a fracture so deep it shapes not only the psyche, but the very ways we move through the world. It molds behavior, crafting patterns of withdrawal, mistrust, and guardedness, born from the desperate need to avoid further pain. Yet, within this abyss, there is also a paradoxical invitation. The soul's descent into alienation is not simply a fall into despair, but a necessary passage through darkness, a symbolic death that precedes rebirth. It is the nigredo stage of the alchemical process, where all that is false and superficial dissolves into shadow and silence. In this crucible of solitude, the ego's illusions of control and belonging are stripped away, exposing the naked vulnerability of the self. This descent is an act of courage, a willing plunge into the unknown depths where the soul confronts its own reflection in the dark waters. It is a sacred journey inward, where the haunting loneliness becomes a mirror, revealing the fragmented self. The abyss strips away the masks and personas, forcing a confrontation with the shadow and the exiled child within. In this sacred solitude, the soul encounters the archetype of the hermit, the wise figure who retreats from the world to seek inner illumination. The hermit's cave is the silent cavern of alienation, a place of darkness where the inner flame burns brightest. Here, the soul learns to dwell with its own company, to face the fear of abandonment not as an enemy, but as a teacher. This journey through alienation reveals the paradox of human connection, that only through the acceptance of solitude can true communion arise. The soul must first become whole in its solitude before it can rejoin the web of relationships with authenticity and depth. The abyss, while a place of exile, is also a sacred sanctuary for the soul's transformation. The shadow of alienation shapes behavior in profound ways. It instills a protective distance, a wary vigilance against intimacy, born from the primal fear of being left behind. Yet it also awakens a deep yearning for recognition, for belonging, for a return to wholeness. These opposing forces create an inner tension, a dynamic dance between withdrawal and approach, fear and desire. In this psychic exile, the self wrestles with the enantiodromia, the turning of opposites, where alienation can transform into profound self-awareness and loneliness into spiritual solitude. The soul's encounter with the abyss is not an end point, but a threshold, a liminal space where the old patterns dissolve and the possibility of integration arises. The abyss of alienation is both a wound and a doorway. It reveals the fractures in the soul's relational fabric, but also offers the potential for healing through conscious presence and acceptance. The journey through this silent cavern is a sacred pilgrimage into the depths of being, where the soul learns to embrace its own shadow, to bear the pain of separation, and ultimately to find its way back to connection, not as dependence, but as a dance of authentic relatedness. Thus, the soul's descent into alienation is a profound chapter in the mythic narrative of individuation. It's a passage through darkness that sharpens the inner light, a sacred solitude that prepares the way for rebirth. Through this journey, the soul moves beyond the fear of abandonment to discover the enduring truth, that wholeness lies not in union with the other, but in the reconciliation of the self with its own shadow and solitude. In this abyss, the soul begins to awaken to the mystery of its own aloneness, a paradoxical space where isolation becomes the soil for deep transformation, and the silent cavern echoes not with despair, but with the possibility of new life. There is a silent stage within the depths of the psyche, a sacred theatre where the archetype of the victim takes its place, draped in shadows both heavy and luminous. This figure, often shrouded in sorrow and pain, moves through the inner landscape with a paradoxical grace, a presence that embodies both the weight of suffering and the hidden power woven into the very fabric of the wound. To witness the victim is to enter a realm where vulnerability and strength are entwined, where the soul's most tender fractures are also the source of profound transformation. The victim is not merely a passive figure, caught in the merciless grip of fate. Rather, It is a dynamic archetype, a psychic energy that calls us to confront the deeper mysteries of pain, loss, and resilience. In this sacred theatre, the victim's story unfolds like an ancient myth, echoing through the corridors of the unconscious with themes as old as humanity itself. It is a tale of rupture and exile, of innocence shattered and trust betrayed, a narrative that shapes behavior beneath the surface of awareness. But within this narrative lies a hidden alchemy, an invitation to awaken to the sacred gifts concealed. Within suffering, the wound of the victim archetype is a dark chrysalis, a container for the nigredo, the blackening phase of psychic transformation where old identities dissolve and the ego's illusions fall away. This stage is painful, often lonely, yet it is necessary for the soul's rebirth. Within the depths of this shadow, the victim harbors the seeds of the self's emergence, the potential for a profound awakening beyond the confines of pain, too. Embody the victim is to confront the shadow of powerlessness, a shadow that, if ignored, can imprison the soul in patterns of helplessness, resentment, and despair. Yet the victim also holds a secret power, the power to bear suffering with grace, to illuminate the darkness, and to become a catalyst for compassion and empathy. This is the paradox of the archetype, a dance between wounding and healing, between collapse and resilience. The psyche's unconscious often weaves the victim's role into the fabric of behavior as a defense against deeper wounds. It is a veil that protects the fragile child within, yet it can also become a prison that limits growth and perpetuates cycles of suffering. Recognizing this dynamic is the first step toward breaking free from the repetitive patterns that bind the soul. In the sacred theatre, the victim's cry is also a call to integration, a summons to reclaim the lost parts of the self that have been scattered by trauma and pain. This reclamation is an act of individuation, where the soul gathers its fragments, healing the fractures caused by abandonment, betrayal, or neglect. The victim archetype also holds a mirror to the ego's need for identity and meaning. It challenges us to look beyond the surface of pain and victimhood to the deeper truths hidden beneath. What gifts might lie concealed within the wound? What strength can be found in the acceptance of vulnerability? These questions lead us into the heart of the soul's mystery. Mythology offers many stories that illuminate this paradox: the phoenix rising from ashes, the wounded healer, the sacrificial victim who becomes the redeemer. These archetypal images reveal that suffering, when embraced with conscious awareness, can become a crucible for transformation and a gateway to higher consciousness. The journey through the victim archetype is not about surrendering to pain, but about transcending it. Through the alchemy of self-awareness, it is about recognizing the interplay of light and shadow within the wound and embracing the full spectrum of the soul's experience. This chapter of the inner journey invites the soul to step into the sacred theatre with open eyes and a willing heart. To witness the victim archetype is to acknowledge the profound complexity of suffering, a complexity that holds within it the promise of healing, growth, and ultimately, liberation. Through this sacred encounter, the soul learns to dance with the paradox of power and powerlessness, to embrace the sacred gifts hidden in the wound, and to move toward a deeper integration of self. It is a passage through darkness that leads to the dawn of a new understanding, a rebirth born not from denial of pain, but from its conscious embrace. Thus, the archetype of the victim becomes not a symbol of defeat, but a beacon of transformation, a reminder that within the depths of suffering lies the potential for profound inner freedom and spiritual awakening. There is a moment, subtle yet profound, when the soul steps before the great mirror, not of polished glass, but of shadow and light, where what has long been hidden within the depths of the unconscious suddenly appears reflected in the world outside. This is the enigma of projection, a psychic alchemy that weaves our unseen pains into the tapestry of relationships, crafting illusions that dance between empathy and conflict. Projection is the veil that both blinds and reveals. It is the unconscious, casting its shadow outward, a displacement of the parts of ourselves we have not yet met. Those fragments buried in the cave of the shadow, exiled for their threat to the fragile ego. Like a dark mirror, the world becomes the stage where our inner dramas play out, where the beloved and the enemy alike serve as messengers of what we refuse to acknowledge. This alchemical process is ancient and universal, rooted in the primordial dance between self and other. Through projection, the psyche attempts to make sense of its fragmented nature, externalizing inner chaos in hopes of mastery, yet often inviting deeper confusion. The wounds we have not faced within ourselves become wounds we perceive in others, fueling cycles of blame, misunderstanding, and despair. But projection is not merely a curse, it holds the secret of transformation. To recognize the projected shadow in another is to begin the sacred journey inward, where the true alchemy unfolds. It is an invitation to reclaim the lost parts of the self, to dissolve the illusions that bind us to repetitive suffering, and to awaken to the deeper unity beneath the surface of duality. In this enchanted mirror, the projected images shimmer like flames, sometimes flickering with the warmth of empathy, other times burning with the intensity of conflict. Each encounter is an initiation, a call to awaken from the slumber of unconscious repetition and to meet the self behind the mask of projection. The world becomes a mirror not only for personal shadows, but also for collective, unconscious forces, the archetypes that shape culture, history, and human destiny. Nations, communities, and families enact their own projections, creating patterns of division and reconciliation that echo the individual soul's journey toward wholeness. Understanding. Projection requires humility and courage, for it demands we look unflinchingly into the darkness within. The ego resists this descent, fearful of the shadow's raw power and the dissolution of familiar identities. Yet, it is precisely through this confrontation that the ego can begin its transformation, evolving from a brittle mask into a vessel of true selfhood. The process of individuation is deeply entwined with the alchemy of projection. As we reclaim projected elements, the boundaries between self and other soften, revealing the interconnectedness of all beings. This unfolding is both terrifying and sacred, a crossing of the threshold into the unknown realms where unity and multiplicity coexist. Mythic tales whisper of this transformative power, Narcissus glimpsing his own reflection and falling into the waters of self-awareness. Psyche's trials that lead to the reunion with Eros, the hero's journey into the underworld where shadows are embraced and redeemed. These stories illuminate the path through the labyrinth of projection, guiding the soul toward integration. In the sacred dialogue between inner and outer worlds, projection is both obstacle and teacher. It obscures truth with illusion, but simultaneously beckons the seeker to deeper insight. The challenge lies in learning to hold the tension of opposites, the light and shadow, self and other, love and fear, without losing the thread of consciousness. Through this alchemical work, the soul awakens to the paradox that the enemy is a reflection of the self, that conflict is the crucible of compassion, and that healing emerges not from denial, but from embrace. Projection, then, is not simply a psychic error, but a doorway, a liminal space where the soul encounters the mystery of its own depth. To journey through the enigma of projection is to step into the sacred dance of shadow and light, where the ego's defenses fall away and the self begins its luminous emergence. It is a passage through darkness that leads not into despair, but into the radiant heart of wholeness. Thus, the world's reflection becomes a sacred text, written in the language of symbols and archetypes, inviting us to read between the lines of our own consciousness. In this reading, the soul finds its way home, not to a place, but to a deeper truth within, where suffering and love entwine in the eternal alchemy of transformation. There is a sacred rhythm within the soul, an ancient dance performed in the hidden theater of the unconscious, where shadow and light swirl in endless embrace. This is no simple ballet of opposites, but a profound alchemy, a sacred union where despair meets hope, pain yields to healing, and the fragmented self begins its slow, luminous integration. In the depths of the soul's crucible, shadows arise. Like dark flames, wild, untamed, and raw, echoes of wounds long buried, fears unspoken, and truths denied. These shadows, once feared as enemies, are revealed as essential partners in the dance. For without shadow, light would lose its meaning. Without darkness, illumination cannot be known. The psyche's healing begins not in the denial of pain, but in the recognition of its essential role within the whole. This dance is the heart of individuation, the sacred journey toward wholeness. The ego, fragile and often blinded by its own narratives, learns to loosen its grip, allowing shadow and light to move together in a fluid embrace. It is here, between the opposites, that the self begins to emerge, shimmering like a distant star. In the twilight of consciousness, pain and healing are woven threads in this tapestry. Despair is not the end, but a threshold, a chrysalis of suffering from which transformation unfolds. Like the phoenix rising from ashes, the soul is called to rise, not by fleeing darkness, but by walking through its depths with steady courage and open heart. Each step in this dance is an invitation to surrender the illusion of control and to trust the unfolding mystery of becoming. Hope flickers as a fragile flame amid the shadows, a beacon that guides the soul through the labyrinth of internal conflict. This hope is not naive optimism, but a deep knowing, an inner assurance rooted in the archetype of the self, the guiding light within us all. It whispers that even in the darkest night, dawn is near, and the soul's journey is toward a radiant horizon. The interplay of shadow and light mirrors the eternal paradox of life itself, a paradox Jung called enantiodromia, where opposites flow into one another, revealing a deeper unity. This is the dance of the sacred feminine and masculine within, the anima and animus, eternally seeking balance and integration. Archetypal images emerge to guide us. The dark forest where shadows hide secrets waiting to be discovered. The labyrinth symbolizing the soul's intricate journey inward. The phoenix embodying death and rebirth, and the sun piercing through clouds, reminding us that illumination follows even the longest night. As this dance unfolds, the ego must become a witness, an inner sage who observes without judgment, who embraces paradox without fear. This witnessing is the alchemical fire that transmutes base suffering into gold, that transforms fragmentation into harmony. It is the silent presence within the storm, the eye of the hurricane, where stillness resides. The journey is neither linear nor easy. There will be moments when the shadows threaten to overwhelm, when despair seems to swallow hope whole. Yet these moments are vital. They are the sacred contractions before the birth of new awareness. The soul learns patience, resilience, and the art of embracing contradictions as teachers rather than enemies. In this sacred dance, the lines between self and other blur. The light that shines within us is reflected in those around us, and the shadows we confront are shadows seen in the collective human experience. This interconnectedness calls us beyond isolation into a deeper compassion, a recognition that our individual healing contributes to the healing of all. The dance of shadow and light is a liminal space, a threshold between fragmentation and integration. It invites us to hold space for all that we are, our wounds and our wonders, without division or denial. Through this embrace, the soul begins to pulse with a new rhythm, a harmony born of paradox and unity. Thus, in the quiet moments of reflection, when the soul listens deeply, it hears the music of this eternal dance, a song of hope woven through the dark, a flame flickering steady and true, guiding us home to ourselves. This is the beginning of integration, the first gentle flicker of the self arising from the sacred union of shadow and light, calling us toward the vast horizon of wholeness. In the silence that cradles the soul's deepest longing, there lies a womb, a sacred void, dark and fertile, where the raw matter of suffering begins its slow, alchemical transformation. This is no ordinary place, but a primordial space, the symbolic origin from which all renewal is born. Here, beneath the noise of the waking world, the soul returns to itself, drawn inward toward a mystery older than time. This womb is not a place of comfort, but a crucible of profound darkness. It is the descent into the abyss, where the ego, stripped of its usual armor, confronts the naked truth of its own fragility. The familiar constructs of persona dissolve like mist, revealing the hidden undercurrents of shadow and pain. Yet within, this darkness pulses the secret heartbeat of life, an invitation to surrender, to let go, and to be reborn. The journey into this inner darkness is a descent, a sacred falling away from the surface light into the deep, fertile earth of the unconscious. It is here the soul undergoes its chrysalis phase, silent, unseen, and seemingly lifeless, yet brimming with unseen transformation. Like the seed buried beneath winter's frost, the soul's suffering becomes the rich soil from which new growth will emerge. This descent is both terrifying and necessary. It calls us to meet our wounds face to face, to embrace the raw edges of pain without flinching. In this shadowed space, suffering is not a curse, but a midwife, guiding the soul through symbolic death toward the possibility of rebirth. It is the paradox of the psyche that in death lies life. In dissolution, the seeds of wholeness are sown. The womb of transformation is woven with archetypal symbolism. It is the great mother's dark embrace, the cosmic night that swallows stars, only to birth new constellations. It is the cave, the underworld, the silent ocean depths where the self waits in patient gestation. Each image whispers of the sacred mystery. To become truly alive, the soul must first return to the source, into the silence and the dark, to gather strength for its emerging. Within this sacred descent, the soul learns the art of patience, the slow unfolding of inner alchemy that cannot be rushed. Time itself seems to dissolve as the psyche embraces its own tempo, a rhythm dictated by the unseen processes of renewal. The chrysalis is a testament to this mystery. Stillness is not stagnation, darkness not emptiness, but a fertile pause before the unfolding. As the soul sinks deeper into this void, it encounters the paradoxical nature of transformation. Surrender is power, silence is voice, and darkness is illumination. The ego, which once resisted the unknown, begins to loosen its grip, allowing the unconscious to reveal hidden wisdom and unexpected gifts. And it is a reversal, an enantiodromia, where what once was feared becomes the source of life and meaning. This inner descent is often accompanied by a profound solitude, a feeling of exile from the familiar world. Yet it is within this solitude that the soul discovers its own inner sanctuary. The womb holds space for all contradictions, fear and courage, despair and hope, death and life, woven into a single thread of becoming. It is here the soul is held tenderly by the archetype of the Great Mother, who neither rushes nor judges, but cradles the self in her eternal embrace. The chrysalis stage of transformation is invisible to the outer eye, but vital to the inner being. It is the silent labor of the soul, the sacred pause before emergence. Like the butterfly trapped beneath its cocoon, the soul struggles, surrendering old forms that no longer serve, breaking through illusions and defenses. Each struggle is a prayer, each contraction a rite of passage toward the authentic self. In this sacred womb, the soul's ancient wounds are not erased but integrated, their sharp edges softened by the alchemy of acceptance. The shadow's darkness becomes a canvas on which the light of consciousness paints new patterns of meaning. The pain that once threatened to fracture the self is transformed into a wellspring of depth and resilience. Emerging from this descent is not a return to what was, but a rising into something wholly new. It is the symbolic rebirth, the birth into authenticity where the soul claims its true shape beyond the masks of persona and the illusions of ego. This rebirth is not a destination but a threshold, the opening into a life lived with greater presence, depth and wholeness. Thus the soul's journey through the womb of transformation is a sacred myth enacted within. It calls us to trust the darkness, to embrace the silence, and to honor the slow, mysterious rhythms of inner renewal. In surrendering to this process, the soul is reborn, not as a shadowless light, but as a whole being, bearing the scars and the radiance of its passage through night. The womb holds the promise of dawn, the quiet certainty that from the depths of suffering, life will rise anew, resilient, radiant, and free. In the vast, silent chambers of the soul, a fire burns, ancient, sacred, and paradoxical. It is the fire of individuation, a pilgrimage of the self that weaves through shadowed forests, blinding flames, and deep silences. This fire is not one of destruction alone, but of profound transformation, a crucible where the raw ore of suffering is forged into the radiant metal of wholeness. Here, the soul awakens from its fragmented slumber and begins the sacred journey toward itself. The path of individuation is the soul's great descent and ascent, a cyclical voyage through the underworld of the unconscious into the light of conscious being. It is a passage marked by encounters with the shadow, the persona, and the ego's fragile boundaries. Yet within these encounters lies the alchemy of transformation, the very essence of psychological rebirth. For to become whole is to embrace the dark and the light, the known and the unknown, weaving these opposites into a living tapestry of meaning. This sacred fire is kindled by suffering, which at first appears as a consuming blaze, threatening to reduce the self to ash. But beneath this initial torment, there is a deeper wisdom. Suffering is the raw material of the soul's awakening. It is the flame that reveals what was hidden in the shadows, the force that shatters illusions and forces the ego to relinquish its brittle hold on identity. The pain calls the self to its edge, demanding a choice, to be consumed by despair or to be transformed by it. Within this crucible, the ego must learn the sacred art of surrender, not defeat, but a willing yielding to the deeper currents of the psyche. It is the moment when the self confronts its own shadow, the hidden aspects long denied or feared. Here the dance of enantiodromia unfolds, the turning of opposites, where the repressed emerges to meet the conscious, and the soul's divided halves seek reunion. The fire of individuation does not purify by destruction alone. It tempers like a master smith, shaping the soul's raw edges into a vessel capable of holding paradox and complexity. It is a process of inner alchemy, where lead turns to gold, where fragmented shards are mended into a mosaic of integrated being. This sacred work demands patience, courage, and an embrace of silence, the fertile ground where transformation germinates unseen. In this silence, the self listens deeply to the whispers of the unconscious, mythic symbols, dreams, and archetypes that guide the soul's unfolding. The inner guide speaks in riddles and paradoxes, revealing the path not through certainty, but through trust in the mystery. The sacred fire burns quietly here, a steady flame illuminating the way through the dark forest of inner turmoil. The journey is not linear, but spiral. Each cycle of descent and ascent brings the soul closer to the elusive center, the self, which transcends ego and shadow alike. The self is the archetype of wholeness, the cosmic mandala at the heart of the psyche. To individuate is to awaken to this center, to recognize oneself as both the journey and the destination, the flame and the fire itself. Within the pilgrimage, the persona, our social mask, must be relinquished, not discarded but understood. It is a garment woven from roles and expectations, necessary for navigation in the outer world, but limiting within the depths of the soul. Individuation calls for the shedding of this mask, allowing the authentic self to emerge, unguarded and radiant. This unmasking is an act of symbolic death and rebirth, a passage from illusion into truth. The sacred fire also reveals the paradox of freedom. To become truly free, one must first be bound by the laws of inner discipline, by the limits set by the inner father archetype, and by the acknowledgement of shadow's presence. Freedom is not chaos, but order, not abandonment, but integration. It is the liberation that comes from knowing oneself fully, including the darkness within. As the fire burns, it purifies the soul's intentions and passions. It refines desires, transforming them from mere ego cravings into expressions of deeper purpose. The flames consume what is false, leaving behind a luminous core, an authentic will that moves with both strength and grace. This will is the pulse of the individuated self, a sacred heartbeat echoing through the cosmos. In the sacred fire, suffering becomes a teacher, a guide that strips away illusion and reveals the naked truth of being. It is here that the soul encounters its own mortality and fragility, and through this confrontation, it discovers an unshakable core of resilience and peace. This is the gift of the flame, the paradoxical blessing of death that births new life. The pilgrimage is not without its trials. The soul must cross deserts of loneliness, mountains of despair, and rivers of forgetting. Yet each trial is a step deeper into the mystery of selfhood, a movement toward reconciliation and healing. The sacred fire burns steadily beneath the surface, unseen by many, but felt by the soul's quietest longing. In this dance of flame and shadow, the ego learns to yield without surrendering, to hold boundaries without building walls, and to embrace the unknown without fear. The fire teaches balance, the delicate interplay of strength and vulnerability, of holding on and letting go. Individuation is the sacred marriage of opposites, a cosmic union where the fragmented soul becomes a unified whole. It is the soul's journey through the labyrinth, guided by the light of inner wisdom and the courage to face the shadows within. The flame that burns in this pilgrimage is the eternal spark of the self, alive, transforming, and radiant. And so the soul walks through fire and silence, carrying the sacred flame within. This flame is the witness, the healer, and the guide, the living presence that leads the self out of darkness into the dawn of awakening. In this sacred fire, the journey is never ending, the self ever becoming, and the soul eternally reborn. In the quiet depths where the soul weaves its ancient tapestry, suffering unfolds not as a mere torment, but as a sacred myth, a story etched in the very fabric of our being. This myth of redemption is the eternal thread that binds despair to hope, Death to rebirth, shadow to light. It is the hidden narrative beneath every wound, the silent promise whispered through the corridors of the unconscious that from pain the soul may rise, transformed, radiant, and whole. To walk into suffering is to enter a sacred theater where the self confronts its own fragmentation. Here the ego meets the shadow, not as enemy, but as guardian of truth. The myth teaches us that redemption is not granted from without, but forged within the crucible of inner alchemy. It is in the fire of our deepest wounds that the soul's gold is refined. The pain we endure becomes the molten stream from which a new self is cast, a self that bears the marks of struggle but shines with the light of authentic being. This myth is ancient, woven into the stories of heroes and gods, of dying and rising deities who descend into darkness to retrieve the lost fragments of life. Like Persephone's descent into the underworld, the soul must enter its own shadowy realm, this fertile void where nothing lives except the promise of transformation. It is here, in this sacred darkness, that the myth of redemption begins, where the old self dissolves in symbolic death, only to be reborn through the womb of the unconscious. The soul's story is never a simple narrative of pain. It is a dance of paradox, where suffering and grace entwine in a delicate embrace. The soul wound becomes the gateway, the scar the sacred map, guiding us toward wholeness. As Jung taught, the ego must be willing to surrender control, to descend beneath the surface illusions and meet the unknown with courage and trust. Redemption arises not from avoidance, but from embracing the shadow fully, acknowledging its voice as part of the self's wholeness. In this sacred journey, the persona, the mask we wear before the world, falls away like autumn leaves, revealing the naked truth beneath. The myth reminds us that authentic transformation demands the shedding of false identities, the courage to stand vulnerably before the self and the other. The soul's mythic redemption is a call to authenticity, a reclaiming of the fragmented self from the grip of persona's illusion. The archetype of the Redeemer lives within each soul, a beacon shining through the storm of suffering. This figure is neither savior nor martyr, but the inner guide who teaches the sacred art of alchemy, turning pain into wisdom, chaos into order, loss into gift. Redemption is the soul's heroic act, the conscious decision to transform suffering into a wellspring of compassion, creativity, and profound meaning. As the soul walks this mythic path, it becomes a bridge, not only to its own depths, but to others who wander through their own shadows. The story of redemption, though intensely personal, is also universal. It echoes through the collective unconscious, connecting us in the shared human experience of suffering and renewal. Our wounds become portals through which empathy flows, transforming isolation into communion. In the stillness of inner reflection, the soul hears the whispered call of this myth, a call to courage, to patience, to love. The journey is long, marked by moments of despair and flickers of hope, yet each step forward is a sacred act of becoming. The myth teaches that redemption is not a destination, but a way of being, a living flame that burns in the heart of the individuated self. The paradox of redemption lies in its unfolding. To be truly free, one must first surrender to the mystery, to the darkness that precedes dawn. It is the sacred dance of opposites, where death births life, where loss brings gain, where the broken vessel becomes the chalice of grace. In this dance, the soul learns to hold both shadow and light, to weave them into a new garment of wholeness. The myth of redemption is also a testament to the power of the self, the archetype of wholeness that dwells beyond ego and shadow. It is the presence that witnesses all transformation, the eternal flame that guides the soul through the labyrinth of individuation. To embrace this myth is to recognize that our suffering is not a curse, but a hidden blessing, a sacred invitation. To awaken. Through this awakening, the soul's story shifts from one of mere survival to one of sacred purpose. The pain endured becomes the seedbed for compassion, the foundation for wisdom, the source of creative expression that touches the lives of others. Redemption is the gift we offer, not only to ourselves but to the world, a living testament to the soul's resilience and grace. In the unfolding of this myth, the inner voice speaks in symbols and dreams, guiding the soul to embrace its shadow, honor its wounds, and rise anew. The sacred fire of transformation burns steadily within, a beacon of hope in the darkest night. This fire illumines the path of the soul, inviting it to step beyond suffering into the radiant light of redemption. And so, the soul's journey continues, an eternal myth of death and rebirth, loss and gain, shadow and light. In this myth, we find our deepest truth, that through the crucible of suffering, the soul is made whole, and from the ashes of despair, the flame of redemption rises, ever bright, ever alive. From the smouldering embers of the past, where suffering once scorched the soul's landscape, a new figure emerges, a figure both ancient and unborn, the ancestor of the future self. This presence does not carry the heavy chains of former wounds, nor the echoes of despair. Instead, it holds the wisdom, etched by survival, the quiet strength born of love, and the sacred promise of renewal. Is a beacon in the twilight, a guiding flame lighting the path toward conscious becoming. To meet this ancestor is to encounter the fullness of time converging within the self. Here, past and future fold together, not as burden and regret, but as fertile soil from which new life springs. This is the culmination of the individuation journey, the self no longer fragmented by the persona's mask or the shadow's veiled secrets, but harmonized in a dance of wholeness. The future self is a testament to transformation, a living archive of the soul's resilience. In the silence that follows suffering's storm, the soul listens deeply. It hears the voice of this ancestor, not loud or commanding, but steady, a gentle rhythm beneath the clamor of everyday life. This voice carries the wisdom of those who walked before, not as ghosts, but as guides, ancestors who understood the sacred art of embracing shadow, traversing inner darkness, and rising anew. It is the voice of legacy, calling us to transcend the mere survival of pain and to step into the fullness of conscious life. This presence embodies the paradox of time in Jungian terms, the enantiodromia, where opposites unite, the past's shadow reconciled with the light of future potential. The ancestor of the future self is not tethered to the linear march of years, but dwells in the timeless realm of the self, that archetype beyond ego's grasp, where transformation is eternal and renewal constant. As the soul aligns with this figure, it begins to weave a new story, one where suffering is no longer the final chapter, but a prologue to awakening. The persona softens its grip, allowing authenticity to flourish. The shadow, once feared and denied, becomes a source of profound insight and creative power. Individuation reveals itself as an ongoing dance, a sacred cycle of death and rebirth. Echoing in the mythic rhythms of human existence, the ancestor's wisdom is not abstract. It lives in the body, the heart, and the silent chambers of the mind. It teaches discernment, the sacred no that guards the fragile self from dissolution, and the compassionate yes that invites growth. This wisdom is the inheritance of transformation, the treasure passed through generations, not in gold or stone, but in the courage to face one's inner darkness and emerge illuminated. Within this sacred inheritance lies the call to legacy, not as a burden to carry, but as a gift to share. The future self becomes the guardian of this legacy, weaving the threads of past pain and present healing into a tapestry rich with meaning. This tapestry is a map for others who wander through their own shadows, a guidepost for souls seeking the light beyond suffering. The metaphor of the phoenix rising from ashes captures this profound renewal. The soul burns, falls into darkness, and then takes flight anew, wings wide, eyes fixed on horizons unseen. But the ancestor of the future self is more than phoenix. It is the eternal gardener, planting seeds beneath the scorched earth, tending the soil where new life will grow, patient and sure. This presence teaches that true transformation is never solitary. The soul, in its individuation, reconnects with the collective, a vast web of ancestral wisdom, cosmic rhythms, and archetypal forces. The future self carries this interconnectedness, embodying the sacred responsibility of conscious becoming, not just for one's own sake, but for the unfolding of the collective soul. In this final stage of the journey, the soul embraces paradox, fully, the weight of past suffering balanced by the lightness of future promise. The silence of inner dissent met by the vibrant call of renewal. The voice of the ancestor whispers gently, inviting the soul to step forward, to embody the fullness of being that only emerges through the crucible of transformation. Here, in this sacred moment, the myth of the self reaches its profound truth. Redemption is not an endpoint, but a continuous unfolding. The future self is both seed and harvest, shadow and light, death and rebirth. It is the living symbol of the soul's capacity to endure, to heal, and ultimately to become. The journey into wholeness through fire and silence, shadow and light, has forged a self no longer fragmented but whole, no longer lost but found. The ancestor of the future self stands ready, not as a distant figure of myth, but as the very presence within you, the silent guide leading into the vast mystery of what is yet to be. To listen to this voice is to accept the sacred promise that within you lies the power to create, to love, and to be. It is to honor the past without being imprisoned by it, to embrace the present with courage, and to step boldly into the unknown with the wisdom of all who came before. And so the soul moves forward, carried on the wings of this ancient future. Ancestor, alive with hope, radiant with purpose, and forever unfolding in the eternal dance of conscious becoming. Description. In this profound exploration of the soul's hidden depths, we journey into the twilight, where light and shadow dance in delicate balance. Guided by the timeless wisdom of Carl Jung, we meet the shadow, the silent guardian of our deepest wounds and forgotten gifts. This sacred encounter is not a descent into darkness alone, but a courageous passage toward wholeness, where the fractured ego dissolves and the true self begins to stir. Through the symbolic language of myth and psyche, we trace the contours of the wounded inner child and the persona's fragile mask, revealing how early trauma shapes the unconscious scripts of our lives. Yet beyond suffering lies the transformative promise of renewal, the rise of the future self, the ancestor who carries the quiet strength of survival and love, a beacon lighting the path toward conscious becoming. This video invites you to embrace the paradox of shadow and light, death and rebirth, pain and healing. It is an invitation to listen deeply to the whisper of the soul's silence, the call of the unconscious, and the steady rhythm of inner transformation. Here, in the sacred dialogue between shadow and self, the journey of individuation unfolds, a lifelong pilgrimage into the mystery of our own radiant wholeness. If this reflection resonates with your own inner journey, please share your thoughts or experiences below. Together, let us walk this path of soul renewal and conscious awakening. Carl Jung, shadow work, individuation, Jungian psychology, inner alchemy, archetypes, soul transformation, psychological depth, collective unconscious, symbolic rebirth.